Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with a super exciting video because today is actually the release day of my latest sewing pattern, which is the Mippy Knit Kit. So the Mippy Knit Kit is basically the ultimate pattern bundle for if you're a sewist and you also like to knit, or if you're a sewist and you have a knitter friend, then this is definitely the pattern for you. The Mippy Knit Kit includes 4 sewing patterns, one of which is a needle case for interchangeable needles, DPNs and also other notions, fixed circular needles. Then there's also a pattern for a cable case that holds all of your cables, like the short and the long ones for the interchangeable needles. Then there's a box pouch for notions in 2 different sizes and also a flat pouch for your projects in 3 different sizes. You can get all of the patterns separately, but you can also buy it as the Mippy Knit Kit, so it's a bundle. Then you can actually get it for 16 euros instead of the regular price of 18 euros when you buy each pattern individually. But now for 1 week only after the release, you can get the entire Mippy Knit Kit for 9 euros. So definitely click the link in the description to go to my Etsy store or my PayHip store and be able to check it out. And like I said, you can also get the patterns separately, so you can kind of also build your own knit kit, which is really exciting. I'm just going to show you all of the patterns now in a little bit more detail. And if you're just here for the sew along or the instructions, there will be timestamps here, so you can go to that part of the video and see how you need to make the pattern that you're currently working on. So first of all, we have the needle case. I will show you my first sample, which looks like this, because it does have 2 different views, which is just the pocket placement. So this is one of them. And here there's no pocket in the front where the button is, but the pocket is on the back. And then here it just looks like this. And this is actually a really nice pocket where it's like 3-dimensional, so it's quite spacious. And then the other option is to have the pocket in the front like this. And I still need to sew on my button, but we can ignore that, okay? I've been very busy. But here we have the pocket on the front, and then this is actually the Velcro side, so you can still open the pocket whilst the needle case is closed. If you don't want that and you want a little bit more natural look, then you just have to turn the pocket the other way around from how it is in the instructions. Then when I open it, I will show you what it looks like from the inside, because I do have all of my needles already stuffed in here. But this is how the needle case looks from the front, and here I have this big flap that you just open, and I have all of my DPNs and my interchangeable needles, and I also have this little notions hook, which is really nice. And then here I have all of my fixed circulars and some other notions as well. So that is the first pattern, the Mippy needle case. And then next up we have the cable case. So this one looks kind of like a passport holder. It's very tiny, and then you have this little bow on the side to open it. And then when you open it, it just looks like this. So there are actually multiple pockets in here that you can kind of flip through. So a normal small pocket, and then also these that have a scalloped edge, which is a really nice touch. So in total there are 6 pockets in here for the cable case. And it also holds your cables quite well. I have not had anything fallen out, which is the true test with all of these things. Because I've definitely made samples in the past where my needles fell out. But here, as you can see, like nothing falls out. So that is really great. And now onto the flat pouch, which comes in 3 different sizes. First of all, we have the one that I did not photograph because it didn't really match the vibe of the other bags. But this is the biggest size of the flat pouch, which is very big. So currently it's stuffed with, I don't know how many balls of yarn, maybe like 20 or so. So it's very overstuffed. So it fits a lot. So if you have like a sweater whip or like a big shawl, maybe even the beginning of a blanket, you would definitely have a good size with this one, because it just fits a crazy amount of stuff. All of the flat pouches are made with a metal zipper. Then we have the medium size, which is a really good in-between size. So for like a top, a shawl, socks, anything like that. And then we have again a metal zipper with a little zipper pull attached. You can do different kinds of quilting patterns, so those have lines. This one has the checkered print. And then here we have the smallest size of the flat pouch, which actually still fits 2 balls of yarn. It does look quite small when I hold it up, but I think this is perfect for socks or like those small scarves patterns, hats, gloves. Those types of projects would fit in here really well. Again, a metal zipper with my little ribbon attached. It's just a really cute pattern. And then finally we have the box pouches. So this one comes in 2 sizes. This one is the biggest size, so this is the size medium, which just looks like this. Again, I've quilted this one with lines, and the box pouch is made with a plastic zipper instead of a metal zipper, because you are sewing through the zipper at some point. And then here we have a little zipper tab This also still fits a ball of yarn, but I would mostly just use this for notions and those types of things, even though a project could fit inside. Then we have the smallest size of the box pouch, and this is just a super cute, really like mini sized box pouch. When you open it up, you can see the notions that I have stuffed inside. So there are a couple of things. This is just perfect for like your measuring tape, needles, like tiny little scissors that you have like this. Everything just fits really well inside the mini pouch, and I think it's my favorite. This one is a little bit more tricky to sew just because it's so small. So I would not really recommend this one as much for beginners as the other patterns. Probably the most beginner friendly ones are the medium box pouch and the flat pouches, all of them. And then the cable case and the needle case are also a little bit more intricate because you are sewing a buttonhole for the needle case, and they both have the scalloped edges, which is also a little bit more tricky to sew. But do keep in mind still that I would definitely say that if you're an adventurous beginner, then you could definitely still make all of these patterns. So now let's just get started with sewing all of them. So first of all, let's talk about the materials that you will need to make all of these projects. I'm going to be talking about the main fabrics. So for the main fabrics for this pattern, I recommend using a non-woven stretch fabric, such as a cotton poplin, a cotton twill, even a cotton canvas will work if you're doing the non-quilted version. And also a linen would work well. For example, I also like a wool fabric for the non-quilted version. So there are definitely some options here. I would just stay away from anything that has too much drape, for example like a viscose fabric. And then also something that is very thick if you're doing the quilted option, because then you're just sewing through so many layers, and I would just avoid that if you can. So the fabric that I will be using for this tutorial is a cotton seersucker fabric, which just looks really fun, and I really like the little texture that it has, and I think once these are quilted, it's going to give a very nice touch to the pattern. Then as for lining goes, I recommend just using a very simple fabric. You can do something printed if that is your style, but I'm just doing something plain. So I like to use a little bit of a thicker lining for the cable case and the needle case. So I will be using a lightweight canvas cotton fabric in basically just like an unbleached cotton color. Very basic, but it's very nice, and I like that it's just a little bit more sturdy for the needles and everything that you're gonna put in there. And then for the flat pouch and the box pouch, I really like just using a cotton poplin fabric, just because it's a little bit thinner and I feel like the pouches don't really need like a sturdy lining. So I will be using this. Then for the notions. For the needle case, there are quite a lot of notions, so I will just show you one by one. First of all, you will need a piece of Velcro, but this is only if you're going to attach the outer pocket. You could also skip that, so this is optional, I guess. So you just need a piece of Velcro. This Velcro is 10 centimeters long, and you will need actually half of that to create one needle case. Then you also need some type of ring or D-ring or swivel clasp to insert inside of the needle case. And we're attaching ribbon to this, and then you can attach your notions to this or like other little things that you need. There are a couple of different options. For example, I've used this in the past, which does not have any opening options. So this is just for removable stitch markers only, because you won't be able to get this ring open, but it's a nice like artsy look. And then here are the more traditional ones. So this is what I recommend in the pattern. This is just a swivel clasp of around 2 centimeters width. And then for this tutorial I will be using this gold one, which is just the same but quite a bit smaller, because I will be using a ribbon that is 1 centimeter wide or 3/8 inch wide. And then another option that you can use is a D-ring, but again this is the option that does not have any closure options. Then you will also need a button for the button closure, so I will be using this leather button, which I just think is very cute. And then finally some ribbon that you're going to attach the little metal part to. So I will be using this velvet ribbon that is about 1 centimeter wide for this video, but in my original sample and in the pattern I recommend using a ribbon that is around 2.5 centimeters wide, which is about this size. And this is also a nice ribbon because this is a cross grain ribbon, so when you cut this it does not fray or anything, which is really nice. And then you will also need a little piece of elastic. I use elastic that is 2 centimeters wide, and I like to use a elastic that is a little bit softer. So this is actually boxer waist elastic, and I just think it looks a lot nicer than regular elastic, and it's also really soft. And I have it in this cream color, and yeah, we're gonna use that on the inside as well. Then for the flat pouch you will need a metal zipper. I'm using one that is 25 centimeters long, which is for the medium size, but for the small size you need a zipper that is 20 centimeters long, and then for the large size you need one that is 30 centimeters long. And then for the box pouch you will need a plastic zipper that is 20 centimeters long for the small size and 30 centimeters long for the medium size. So that just looks like this. And the plastic zipper needs to be close-ended, and the metal zipper also needs to be close-ended, which just means that when you open it, you cannot open it fully like a jacket. And then finally, all of these patterns can be made without the quilting, but I will be quilting all of them just because I personally really like that look. And then for the quilting and the batting, I recommend using a fusible batting. So that just looks like this, and this is the Felicelina H640. This basically has a glue side attached to it that, I don't know if you can tell, but it's kind of like grainy textured compared to the regular side of batting. So this is the glue side, and you just iron it on, and then you don't need to have a backing fabric when you're quilting. So do keep in mind that if you're using regular batting, so something that is not fusible, you need to quilt it a little bit differently. So you will have the main fabric, then the batting that is not fusible, and then a backing fabric, just so that the fluffy bits of the batting doesn't get in your sewing machine. So basically you will need to cut the lining twice for everything. But since I'm using fusible batting for this pattern and also in the instructions, you only need to cut the lining as much as it is written on the pattern. And I do really recommend that, because with this you don't need to use a backing fabric. Like, this doesn't get in your sewing machine at all, and the fabrics are not shifting or moving around, and that's very nice. Then finally, for the flat pouch, I will also be using some ribbon to attach to the zipper, just as a little zipper pull. Those are all of the materials that you will need. Now we can get started with cutting the pattern and getting ready to sew. And then here are just some regular sewing notions that you will need. So of course, first of all, you will need a good pair of fabric scissors. Then you will need some sewing pins. This is totally optional, but sewing clips are also a very nice accessory to use. Then you will need something to mark your fabric with. Then another thing that is optional are some pattern weights. You can also use pins, but pattern weights are very handy to use. Then of course a measuring tape. Then you will need some good quality thread. So this is actually the big spools of Gutermann thread. Then you will also need to have a hand sewing needle to attach the button for the needle case. And then needles for inside your sewing machine. So I really like this brand. And then the higher the first number is here, which is 80, the thicker the fabric that you're sewing with. So I think 80 is a really nice number for this pattern specifically. And then you will also need a clear ruler. This one is in centimeters, just because that's what I use. Then finally you need some little clippers for threads. And then hopefully you won't actually need this, but a seam ripper is always nice to have on hand. Okay, so here are all of our pattern pieces for the needle case. I've already assembled the paper pattern and, stuck everything together. So here are the pieces, and we're just going to be cutting everything out. First of all, I like to kind of organize things by what is going to be cut out of the lining fabric and what is going to be cut out of the main fabric. Okay, so these are for the lining fabric. These are main fabric or main and lining fabric. So we're going to be starting with all of the lining pieces. First of all, I'm going to be cutting the flap. This is one of the pattern pieces where you have to be a little bit more careful, because as you can see here, there is a line that says X. Fold and cut upper part for pocket 1. So basically what that means is that you're going to take the pattern, fold it on this black line, and then this upper part of the pattern is going to be pocket 1. But then when you open it up, it is the flap part B. So I hope that makes a little bit sense. It's just a way to save a lot of paper and also make things a little bit easier. We need 2 pieces for the flap lining, so I'm just going to put the fabric still on the fold, place this here and then cut around it. Okay, then I'm going to just open up the fabric, because all of the pieces that we're going to cut next only need 1 piece. So it's just a little bit easier to not have the fabric on the fold. So first of all, like I said, we're going to fold and cut the upper part for pocket 1. Then this is the next pattern piece of the needle case that is also a little bit more complicated, because this one has a bunch of different fold lines. So first of all, we're going to be cutting the largest pocket E, which is going to be the entire size. So you don't need to do anything to the pattern. Just place it down and cut all around it. Then the next pocket we're going to be folding here on the first fold line. So you just fold it there. Then that will be our second pocket, so cut all around it. Then again, for our third pocket, fold it on this line. Then here you can see that it's starting to poke out on the top. So you would just fold that inside. And then we have our third pocket. And then finally we need to cut the facing, which is going to be this part of the pattern. So we will fold everything basically to the inside. And then this would be our little facing piece that we're going to cut 3 of. because we have 3 pockets in the different lengths, and then we're going to cut 3 facings for them. Now, just a little trick to cut out the scallops. One thing that I like to do is just cut a straight line that goes right across the top part of the scallops, just like that. Then I will actually use my little fabric marker, and then I will trace all around these little scallops. And that just makes it much easier to actually cut them out. And you're not going to see this when we're sewing it anyways. Okay, so now you're going to take piece A, which is the front and the back. And we have the batting with the wrong sides up, so the sticky side is upwards, facing us. Then we're going to place the main front on top with the wrong sides of the fabric touching the glue side of the batting. Just going to line that up neatly so that everything is matching up. And then I'm going to press this with an iron. And I'm going to be doing the exact same thing to pocket H, which we cut on the fold. So this is how the pocket looks when you fold it open. Okay, so we're just going to press this with an iron. And then doing the exact same thing to pocket H. Now we're going to take these 2 pieces and quilt them on the sewing machine. First of all, you could mark your lines as I have instructed in the pattern, which is basically just taking your ruler at a 45-degree angle, starting from a corner point and then marking straight down. Then doing the next line the same, but then 3 centimeters away, marking your pattern like that. But I actually kind of like to start with just one line, and then I will actually kind of eyeball the rest, just because I find that a little bit easier to do, to be honest. And then I'm not fiddling around with like fabric markers that don't want to go away from my fabric. So if you also don't want to fiddle around with a bunch of markers, you just place the ruler straight on the corner so everything is aligned well. Then I have a 45-degree angle on my ruler here, which is like this. Then I like to take another ruler and place it on top, following that 45-degree angle line. And then I will put pins in here. Then I will take away that other ruler, keeping this ruler here steady, and then pinning along here. Then take away my ruler. So this is going to be my first sewing line, and then it's all neat without using a fabric chalk or like fabric marker. Okay, so now we're at the sewing machine. You're going to set your sewing machine to a long stitch length. I'm using a 4 stitch length. Then you're going to take your pattern piece with that corner that we started on. Then place your foot down, and then without back stitching, we're just going to sew straight across that marked line. Then you're going to cut away those threads. And then I'm going to sew my next line 3 centimeters besides it. So now we're going to take our quilted pocket 4, and we're going to take our pocket 4 lining, which is called G, and we're going to put that right sides together on top of each other. Then I'm going to take some sewing pins and then pin all around to pin this in place. Then I'm going to sew around this entire circumference, and I'm going to leave an opening here at the top. So basically I'm going to start sewing around here, and you're going to set your sewing machine stitch length back to regular. And of course we're going to be back stitching now. Okay, so we finished sewing around the entire circumference, and then I'm going to trim away some of these corners, whilst being very careful to not actually cut into my stitching. So all 4 corners I'm going to cut away. If you want, you can also trim away the seam allowance, but I'm just leaving it. Then I'm going to take the pocket, so you have this little opening, and you're going to pull the right sides of the fabric out through this opening. So you just keep on pulling on the fabric. This can be a little bit fiddly, but in the end you will get there. And I especially like to insert kind of like my thumb into each corner point and then pull it out that way to get some crisper corners. There are also tools that you can use, but this is just how I do that. Alright, then we have turned our pocket to the right side. Then I like to trim away some of these threads from our quilting, just because we of course left all of those threads, but as you can see there was only one, and all of the other threads are nicely tucked away into our pocket. Then we're going to take this little seam allowance of the opening, and we're just going to press that underneath the iron and also press the entire pocket flat. Next up, we're going to take our piece of Velcro, and I'm going to just cut this one in half, but you need to have a piece of 5 centimeters long or 2 inches, which of course means that you need both sides of the Velcro. Alright, then I'm just going to turn my pocket to be with the lining facing me, and I'm going to open my piece of Velcro. And then we're going to sew one of these sides in the center of this pocket. Does not really matter which side it is, just one of the sides. And I'm going to take this to my sewing machine. Okay, so now I'm at the sewing machine and then we're going to sew one of the sides of the Velcro. And I'm just folding this in half to find the center of the pocket so that I am sure that it is nicely centered. Then place my Velcro on top. And then before continuing, I'm also going to sew my opening closed. So I'm going to turn it to the right side and I'm just going to stitch as close to the edge as possible along the entire top edge. Okay, turn it back to the wrong side and then I'm going to stitch all around my Velcro to stitch that in place. So now we have sewn the Velcro to the pocket. This is how it looks from the inside and then the right side will look like this. So you do have a little square outline here. So here we have our pocket and we're going to turn it around to be the lining sides facing us. And we're going to fold this edge in, which is our seam allowance edge, by 1 centimeter and then iron that. Then we're going to turn the pocket over back to be the main sides facing. And then we're going to press this iron seam to sit on top of this main quilted fabric. We're going to fold that again by 1 centimeter. So basically just like that. Press that again with an iron. So now we basically have like 2 little folds there. Then we're going to turn it back around to be the lining side facing again. And then once again, we're going to press all of these seams back to the inside of the pocket. And then once you've done that, we have all of these little layers. And that is how we're creating the spacious pocket. So just repeating that on the other side. Then we're going to take our finished quilted front piece with the right sides of the fabric facing up. Then you're going to take some sewing pins and also that pocket 4 that we just ironed, as well as your pattern piece. So first of all, I'm going to put my pattern piece back on this and then we're going to determine the pocket placement. So I'm going to be doing my pocket on the front, which is this placement. So that is where the button closure is. And I'm going to be inserting a pin right through my pattern piece in each corner point. And then I'm going to hold that pin and push it through my paper pattern. So we are creating holes into our paper pattern. And then we have our 4 pins marking each corner point of the pocket, which is really hard to see in this fabric, so I'm sorry about that. Then we're going to take that pocket piece with these little folds, make sure they are folded. And then we're going to put that on top of our little markings. And then we're going to sew along this seam. So we're not going to sew on top of all of these layers. We're only going to be sewing through the first fold by 1 centimeter. So you can just move this to the other side and then pin that in place. So here you can see where we're going to be sewing just along this edge. And we're only going to be sewing through that first fold of 1 centimeter. Okay, so now we're back at the sewing machine. Going to put this underneath. And then stitch right along that edge as close to the edge as possible. Then we're going to be doing the exact same thing on the opposite, like short end of this pocket. So you're going to basically just move this over to sit right alongside those notches. Remember to have that fold of 1 centimeter. And then I'm going to just pin this in place and sew along the edge again. Okay, and I completely forgot to attach my Velcro actually. You need to attach your Velcro before attaching the pocket. So I'm just going to quickly do that, but you would use the pocket on top as a guide for the placement. And then I'm just going to sew around my Velcro. Okay, then we're going to close our pocket on that Velcro. So then everything should be laying nice and flat. Kind of put those folds back on the sides. And then we're finally going to sew alongside the entire bottom edge of the pocket. And this is going to be a little bit tricky because then at the corners we are sewing through like a lot of layers of fabric. So definitely just take it slow, and it's also good to just start in the center and then work your way from there. Because when you start on like a very big chunk of fabric, usually a sewing machine doesn't really like that. So it's better to start slow and then work your way up. And if your sewing machine is having trouble with getting through all of those layers, you can just trim away a tiny bit of this seam allowance of the first 1 centimeter fold. Because once we've sewn over all of these layers, that is not really going to be noticeable. So that is what I'm going to be doing on this side, just to make it a little bit easier. Okay, so then our pocket is attached and this is how it looks. My seams are a little bit bulky because I forgot to trim away the seam allowances. But you will not forget because I will have instructed you better. Yeah, then this piece is finished, so you can just lay this to the side and then we're going to be moving on to the lining. So now we will be sewing our facings for the pocket E, which is pocket 3 with the scalloped edges. So pocket 3 has 3 different lengths. So one is long, then we have a medium one that will sit on top, and then the shortest one that will sit on top of that one. And we're going to sew a facing along these little scalloped edges. Just gonna start with the shortest one for demonstration purposes. So we're going to take one of the facing pieces that we have 3 pieces of, and we are going to just put that on top and pin that in place. Now actually don't use a lot of pins in this. I only pin like the scallops on top, because the key to sewing scallops is to sew very slowly, and I found that a lot of pins doesn't really necessarily help with this. But I like to take my paper pattern piece, then place that on top about 6 millimeters away from the edge, because that is going to be the seam allowance for the scallops. Then I'm going to take my marker, and then I'm actually going to just mark right along all of these scallops on the top. And that will actually really help showcase where we need to sew, just because cutting it in all of the different fabrics is very difficult. And then I take my paper away, and then it just looks like this. And of course we have the fabrics pinned right sides together, but my fabric doesn't really have a right or a wrong side. And now we're just going to be sewing from one end to the other. So when you reach a corner point like this, you're going to put the needle down and turn like this. Okay, then we're not going to be trimming away any of these seam allowances, but we are clipping into each plunge. So we have 2 plunges for the needle case. And be very careful to not clip into your stitching. So just like that. And then we're going to leave the rest of the seam allowance, except here for the little corners. I'm also just going to trim those away. Alright, and then we're going to be turning this to the right side, and I found the best way to do this is by just using your fingers and taking it one by one. So I'm just putting my fingers into the curve of the scallop and then kind of just gently turning it to the other side, and then using my fingers to really poke out all of the stitching. And this is where I like to use some sewing pins, so I will actually put a little sewing clip on the top to kind of hold that in place. Okay, then it will look something like this. And I'm going to just take this to the ironing board and press everything flat. Okay, so then we're taking that scalloped pocket and we're going to be removing these little clips one by one and then ironing it flat. Then we're going to fold this seam to the inside by 1 centimeter. And then we're just going to sew right along this line, right across the edge as close as possible. And then once you finish, that will look like this. And then you will have 3 finished pockets. Then we're going to take our 3 strips pieces. Right now I only have 2, so I need to cut another one. Then we're going to use the notches that are on the inside and then fold it by 1 centimeter to the wrong side. And then we're going to press that flat with an iron. This is basically just folding it by 1 centimeter, but we are just using the notches as a little guide. Then when you turn it over to the right side, it should look something like this. And then our finished strip should be 1.5 centimeter wide. And I'm using this in my main fabric. You can also do the lining fabric, but I just think this is a fun contrast. And you will see how that looks on the inside of the bag. Then we are going to take our pocket 2 lining piece and we're going to fold this short edge by 1 centimeter to the inside and press that with an iron. And then fold it again by 1 centimeter and press that again. And then we're going to sew right along that edge. Then I'm going to do exactly the same to pocket 1 and I'm going to do that to the long side. So folding that by 1 centimeter and then again by another centimeter. Next up we are going to take our B flap pieces. So you will have 2 of those pieces on the lining fabric and we're going to put those right sides together and then stitch along the entire circumference, but we're going to leave the long straight edge open. Then right after sewing I'm going to trim away some of these seams, again being careful to not cut into my stitching. I'm only really doing that around my corners, so it will look like that. And then I'm going to turn it to be the right sides out. Again, using my fingers to really press everything nicely. And then I'm going to take it to my ironing board and press everything flat. And now we are going to get ready to start assembling the lining. So I've already grabbed my notions that I'm going to be using and just going to put those to the sides. So what we'll be using now is our pocket 1 piece, which is the long pocket. Then we have our pocket 2 piece, which is the shorter pocket. And then we have 3 pieces with the scalloped edges of pocket 3. And then of course the back lining piece B. So first of all, we're going to be taking our short pocket 2 and we're going to place that right in between these 2 center notches and then lining up the bottom edge and just placing that on top. Then we're going to take our longest pocket 3, which is this one, and then we're going to place that right next to it, and then that should fall right on the notch. And then I'm just going to use a couple of pins to hold this in place. Just like that. Then I'm going to take my measuring tape and then measure 9 centimeters from the bottom edge, which is 3.5 inches. So this is 9 centimeters. And then that is where we're going to be sewing our straight line. So you can either mark the fabric. I'm just putting a pin into it. And then we will be sewing a straight line straight across, just like this. Now we're going to be sewing our needle spacing on our pocket 2. And you can either use the measurements that are in the pattern or you can create your own. But if you create your own, please do keep in mind that from this raw edge there is around like 6 millimeters of seam allowance everywhere. So here there's 6 millimeters, here there's 6 millimeters. So that is just something to keep in mind. So if you want your first pocket to be 1 centimeter big, basically don't sew your first line 1 centimeter away from there, because then you're going to end up with a pocket that is like less than half a centimeter big. So I will be sewing my first pocket 1.5 centimeter away from my raw edge. So this is where I will be taking my ruler, and I'm also going to be using a pencil. Just because a pencil is a little bit lighter, then I'm just going to put that 1.5 centimeter away from the edge and draw a line. Then the next one I'm going to do again 1.5 centimeter away from the first. Then I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and sew across all of these lines. Okay, so after sewing those lines, we're going to take our pocket 1 piece and just place it right on top, again lining up all of the side seams, so all of these side seams, and then it will line up right with the side seam of the back piece. Then I'm also going to be taking my piece of elastic and I'm going to be cutting a piece that is 15.5 centimeters long, which is around 6 inches. Then from this pocket I'm going to be measuring 2.5 centimeters upwards, and then here I will be placing my elastic. And I'm just going to use a little pin again to really show my marking, and also especially here. And then I'm going to pin my pocket 1 in place right at this side seam. Then here I'm going to take a couple of these pins away. Then I'm going to place my pocket 3 pieces on top. We're going to be doing that in order of length, so we already did the longest one. Then I'm going to put the middle one on top of that, and then the shortest one on top of that. So we have 3 layers of pockets here. So we're going to take our strip pieces that are 1.5 centimeters wide, and we're going to put those right on top of all of those raw seams. And then you're going to pin in place through all of the layers, so also through the back lining layer. Okay, so then everything is pinned securely, and then we're going to sew right along the edge of both sides of the strip as close to the fold as possible. And you're going to do that with all 3 of these strips, and then all of the pockets will actually be really secure. Okay, now we're going to be marking for our needle placement again. So we're going to mark the needle placement on this pocket, which is pocket 1, and then also here on the rest of pocket 1 and the elastic that is there. Then I've also secured the side seam here just with a like 0.5 centimeter seam allowance, just to get that secure. And then you also don't forget that there's a seam allowance there. I'm just taking my ruler and putting it right next to this little strip of fabric. So putting my ruler on top, measuring 2 centimeters, making sure that everything is nice and straight, and then marking that first line. And this will again leave one bigger pocket there, which is nice to put like cables or just big needles in. So we're gonna sew all of those. But before that, I would like to also mark the placements here, just so I can get everything done at the same time. So we're going to be measuring 2.5 centimeters from the raw edge. Then I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and stitch down all of these lines. Of course with a lot of back stitching to really get everything nice and secure. Okay, so this is the finished lining piece right now. Now we're going to take our ribbon and we're going to cut a piece of 8 centimeters long. which is 3 inches and 1/8. So you're going to insert the ribbon around your swivel clasp or D-ring or whatever you've chosen, and then you're just going to fold this nicely in half that is properly centered, and then it will look like this. And then we're going to sew this 1 centimeter away from that notch, because that first notch is where our seam allowance is going to be when we're sewing the lining to the main piece. So we're going to do that 1 centimeter besides that, and we're going to just sew it with like 6 millimeters of seam allowance. So I've attached the little ribbon with our swivel clasp here. Then we are going to take our finished flap piece and we're going to line up the side seam of the flap piece right with that top notch. So right there, and then I'm going to pin that in place. And then the other side seam should fall right next to this strip piece. Then I'm going to put a pin there as well. Then I'm going to sew right along this top edge with a 6 millimeter seam allowance. So here we have our completely finished lining piece. So with our flap and our little notions hanger, it's all looking really good. So we're going to move that to the side. Then we're going to take our main quilted front piece that had the little pocket 4 attached to it. Then we're going to place this right on top, so they are right sides together. And then you're going to pin along the entire side seam, but we're going to leave an opening here on this little short end. And you want to be careful to move that flap over to the side, because we are sewing with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. And you don't want to accidentally sew the flap here, so then you cannot use it anymore. And then I'm going to start sewing right by this clip, so all around the entire circumference with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and then come back approximately here so that we have at least minimum like a 5 centimeter opening, which is 2 inches. So this is how our needle case is currently looking. We are going to be first trimming away all of these corners again, being very careful to not cut anywhere into our stitching. And then I also just like to trim away some of that extra bulky seam allowance. Then we're going to take our opening that we left here, and then we're going to be turning our needle case to the right side by just pulling the right fabric through that opening, which is a little bit fiddly. Like the bigger you leave the opening, the easier that this is, but then also the bigger you have like an opening. Here it is. Then you really want to be able to poke out all of those little corners. So you can just insert your fingers to that opening and then try to really pop out all of these corners to make everything look nice just by pushing your finger into one of those corners. Okay, so now it's looking a little bit rough, but we're going to take this to the ironing board and just give everything a really good press. Then the first thing that I would like to give a good press is the seam allowance from the opening. So just fold that to the inside by 1 centimeter and then iron that to really lay flat. And then I'm going to flatten everything else out. So here you can see, for example, just that the main fabric is really showing on the inside. So you really want to make it so that that seam allowance is sitting right on the edge. Then I also like to turn it just to iron it also from the right sides. Then we will be stitching right along this entire edge to close this opening. And then the final thing you want to do is just change to your button foot and get your button settings ready. So my sewing machine is actually really nice, so it just does like an automatic buttonhole, like I don't have to do anything. So I've selected my size, which is for a 2 centimeter wide button, and then I just have to press start and then it will sew my button. Alright, and then here we have the finished buttonhole. So now onto our cable case. I'm first going to be cutting some pieces from the lining fabric. So I'm using my canvas fabric that is on the light side for a canvas fabric. And we again have some pieces that need a little bit more attention to detail. So for example, here we have the cable case, which is the front and the back. So you cut one main, one lining and one batting, just the full size that it is. But then it also says X, fold and cut the bottom part for pocket 1. So that means to fold it on this black horizontal line, and then this part is going to be our pocket 1, and we only need to have one of those. So that is the first piece that I'm going to cut. And then I'm also cutting that center bottom notch. Then we also need to cut our facings for pocket 2, so we have again an X, fold and cut the upper part here for the facing, so that's going to be this part. So this is an alternative way to cutting the scallops in our pockets. So like you just saw, I just cut straight across to hit the top parts of all of the scallops. Then I do the same for the facing, and I'm going to put those on top of each other, right size facing. Then I'm going to be placing this piece on top. Then I'm going to drag it down to be like 0.5 centimeter away from my top edge, which is this. And then I'm going to be marking all of these scallops with my chalk. And then that is where I'm going to be sewing. And then after that I will trim the seam allowance down. And then I'm also going to just pin these in place. So for the cable case we're going to take our front and back piece, which is basically the same. And then we're going to put our front main piece on top of that. So the wrong side of the fabric is facing the glue side of the batting. And then we're going to press that with an iron to secure it. Then for this pattern I'm just going to do quilting lines that are just horizontal like this, and then 2 centimeters spaced away, just to mix things up a little bit. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and sew all of those stitching lines. So for the quilting we're going to change our stitch length to the long stitch length, and we're just going to sew all of these lines without back stitching. Then we are taking our pocket 1 piece and folding one of the long sides by 1 centimeter to the inside, and then pressing that, and then doing that again by 1 centimeter. And then we're going to sew right along this fold line. So now we're going to take our back main piece. So be very careful to actually not use the lining of pocket 2, but you want to use the back lining piece that you only have 1 piece of, because this piece is actually slightly bigger than the pocket 2 lining. So we're going to take pocket 1 that we just hemmed, and we're going to place that right on top, lining up the side corners. Then I'm going to twist and turn it and start sewing from that notch that is in the center. So we're going to put my needle down, I'm going to backstitch and then sew straight ahead towards the end of this little pocket, and then backstitch there as well. And make sure to change your stitch length back to a regular stitch length. You can also mark this line if you have trouble. So that is our back lining kind of finished. Then we're going to take our pocket 2 pieces that have the facings attached, and we're going to sew across those marked lines that we did earlier. Okay, so then after sewing, our pocket 2 will look like this. Then I'm going to be taking my fabric scissors and I'm going to trim this entire seam allowance down to 0.5 centimeter. And you have to be very careful to not cut into any of the stitching. Then with our little thread clippers, we're going to trim into each little plunge. So each time that the scallop goes down. And then we're going to turn this over to the right side by inserting our fingers here. And then before taking this to the iron, I actually like to put some sewing clips on there to secure it. Okay, so here we have our scalloped pockets. Then I'm going to be removing these little sewing clips one by one and just pressing it with an iron. Then I will turn the pocket towards the other side, and I'm going to be finishing the edge of my facing. So I'm folding it by 1 centimeter towards the inside and then pressing it like that. And then I'm going to sew right along this folded edge, and I'm going to do that for both pockets. So now we're going to take our 2 pocket 2 pieces with the scalloped edge and our pocket 2 lining, and we're going to sew right on top. So we're just going to place this on top for both sides. And if you have a printed backing lining fabric, this should be the right side, and then this is the wrong sides of the scalloped pocket. And then I'm just going to pin this in place along all of these side seams. And then we're going to be sewing from the center notch on the bottom right until this point, and we're also going to backstitch a lot. Again, you can eyeball it or you can use a fabric marker beforehand. Then after you've sewn those center lines on the pocket 2 pieces, I'm just going to remove all of the pins that I placed, and then we're going to place these pockets on top of each other with right sides touching, and we're going to match up all of the corners and also the side seams here where the pockets kind of meet. So I'm just going to put a pin in there. Then I'm going to be sewing around this entire circumference, and I'm going to leave an opening right here in the center, and this is on the side of the scalloped edges. So I'm not going to leave an opening on the bottom, but on the top side. And I'm sewing with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Then I'm going to take that piece that I've just sewn, take my fabric scissors and then clip away all of the corners, whilst being careful to not cut into my stitching. Then I'm going to be using that opening that we left to turn this towards the right side. Using my fingers, like poking them inside each corner. Then we're going to give this a press at the ironing board, especially the seams of the opening. And then we're going to top stitch along this entire seam, right alongside that edge as close as possible. So then here we have our finished pocket 2 lining, which is the same on both sides. So both sides have the right sides facing. So this has created 4 pockets for the cable. So 1, 2, and then 3 and 4, which is really nice. Then I am taking my back lining piece, which is the piece that had the pocket 1 attached to it right down the center. And I'm going to attach the pocket 2 piece right on top. And you basically want to match that up so that everything is in the center. So you could use a measuring tape or you could eyeball it. And then once you've found the center, you're going to pin that in place. And then you're going to sew it secure right from the top edge here, right down to the center. So basically we're stitching across all of the stitching lines that we've done before, but just a little bit further to also capture this bit of the pocket too. So here we have our finished lining. So our lining piece will have now 6 pockets. So we have the pocket from pocket 1, then this little pocket 2 insert that you can kind of fold like a book. And now we're going to take our main front quilted piece, that is this one, and we're going to place it on top, so right sides together. But before sewing, we're going to cut 2 pieces of ribbon of 25 centimeters long, and then we're going to put that between our side seams. And I'm doing this now because I forgot, but you should be doing this when you have finished the quilt piece, like I have written in the pattern. I don't know why I did it like this. It's have to do something with stress. And then we're going to match up all of the corners. So then we're going to sew around the entire circumference with 1 centimeter seam allowance. And we're again going to leave an opening, but right on the side where our little scalloped edge is. So that is going to be the top edge of the pocket. Then after sewing, we're again going to trim away all of our corners, whilst being careful to not cut into our stitching. Then I'm also going to trim away the seam allowance. I'm just dividing basically the seam allowance in half. So cutting that down to be around 0.5 centimeter, with the exception of the opening in the front, because we still need that seam allowance to close our opening. And then we're going to use that opening to turn it towards the right side. And then I'm going to give everything a good press, especially this little opening right here, tucking away the seam allowance to the inside of the back. So I'm gonna give this a quick press and then I will meet you back here at the sewing machine. Then we're going to sew around the entire circumference of the bag with the right sides facing. Now onto our flat pouch. I'm first going to be cutting the lining, because this is the same pattern piece for the front and the back. You need 2 main, 2 lining and 2 batting, and these notches on the bottom are only for the lining fabric. So we're going to take our batting piece and we're going to place that with the glue sides facing up. Then we're going to put our main piece on top with the wrong sides facing the glue side. And then we're going to press that with an iron to secure, and repeat that for the other piece. So we have a front and a back. It doesn't really matter which one is which because they are the same. And then I'm going to be quilting vertical lines on this pattern that are 2 centimeters apart, just like this. You can also do diagonal lines like is mentioned in the pattern. So I'm going to bring this to the sewing machine and quilt that. So you're going to set your stitch length to a long stitch length, and then we're going to start sewing without back stitching. And then when I'm working with a pattern like this, I like to start from the center notch in the top, so that you have like a nice line down the center, and then just work your way out from there. Then we're going to take our zipper and we're going to fold it in half. And we're going to fold it in half so that the zipper teeth are like together right there. So we can find the center of the zipper. You can either place a pin in it or you can make like tiny cuts into the zipper to find the center, which is what I like to do because then you can do it on both sides. Then I'm going to take that main quilted front piece, then find that top notch that I have, which is right there. And I'm going to line up the zipper with that notch and place a pin in it. Then I'm going to change to a zipper foot and then sew right along my zipper teeth to secure this in place. And then I'm going to start stitching right next to my zipper teeth. So not completely from the raw edge here, but right next to my zipper teeth. So I have a little bit of seam allowance there. Then at some point you're going to have to put the needle down and then your foot up so you can open the zipper so you're able to sew everywhere. Then I'm going to take one of my lining pieces and I'm going to put that on top. Again, lining up that center notch and putting a pin in it. And then I like to flip it so that I can see my previous stitching, because that is what I'm going to be following. And then when I open it up, it looks like this. So you have the zipper in between the right fabric and then the lining fabric. So this is going to be the inside of the pouch, and like that. Then we're going to repeat that for the other side of the zipper. So again, taking my main piece, lining up that little notch that I made with the notch on my quilted piece. So now we have our piece facing us like this, and I'm going to put my lining on top again with the right sides down, lining up the notch, and then turning the piece so I can see my stitching, and then following that exactly. And then you have inserted your zipper, so it will look like this from the right sides. And then when you turn it, it actually looks like this. So the zipper is completely hidden away with the lining piece. Then you're going to give this a little press on the ironing board. And then we're going to top stitch along the zipper. And again, we're going to follow the stitching that we've previously done. And I like to do this with my zipper foot because I feel like I can get a little bit closer. So I'm going to change to a bit of a longer stitch length and then sew. You want to make sure that you're sewing through the main fabric and the lining on one side, but not all of the sides. Then do the same for the other side. So after top stitching, it's very important that you actually open up your zipper before continuing, or else the next steps are going to be really difficult. So just make sure that that zipper is down. And now we're going to line up the fabrics. So you're going to put the quilted fabric on top of the quilted fabric and then line up that. And then I'm doing exactly the same on the lining fabric. So the lining fabric should be on top of the lining fabric. All of these things are right sides together, of course. Then I will put in some pins right here, right next to my notches, just as a little reminder for myself that I need to leave an opening there. Then here, the zipper is going to face towards the main fabric side. So you're basically folding it like this. So the zipper is on the main fabric. And I'm going to put a pin in there. Then repeat that for the other side. So I'm going to start sewing right here at the first pin in my lining fabric. Then I'm going to sew around my lining with a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. And then when I reach my pin of where I meet the zipper and I go into the main fabric or the quilted fabric, I change to a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So I go all the way around that. Then meet back here with the other side of the zipper, change to 1.5 seam allowance, and then go back to this second pin. So we have a little opening on the bottom of the lining that we will use to turn the back towards the right side. So now I'm going to change back to a regular sewing foot, and I'm going to start right here with that lining. Just like that. So then here across where we're sewing our zipper, you definitely are not sewing over any metal parts because this is a metal zipper, of course, and we are just sewing with 1.5 seam allowance as well. And then before turning our back towards the right side, we still want to sew all of our corners. So we have 1, 2, and then 3 and 4 corners that we're going to be sewing. And yeah, this is where it gets a little bit more tricky. But basically when you grab the two sides of fabrics like this and you open them up, then you're going to actually fold open this little seam allowance here on the bottom. And you want to make sure that these seam allowances are right on top of each other. So actually when I fold this corner down, this seam allowance from the side seam is right on top of this seam allowance that is my bottom seam. Then we're going to be measuring inwards. So I am making the smallest size. Let me just check the measurement again. And for the smallest size, we should be measuring in 5 centimeters. And then I'm going to be placing a pin. And then we're going to put this underneath the sewing machine and we're going to sew right across it. So we're going to sew from this side towards the other side, just a straight horizontal line. If you find this tricky, you can also mark that with a fabric marker. And with this step, you really want to do a lot of back stitching. And then you're going to trim away all of this excess seam allowance. And then you're going to repeat this for all corners. So grabbing the two sides of fabric away from each other, then this will kind of just fall into place together. Measuring 5 centimeters for the size small. Then I'm also going to do that on the lining fabric. And then after you've sewn all of those corners and trimmed away the excess fabric, now we're going to start turning our bag towards the right sides by using the opening. And then so far it should kind of look like this. But we're going to take the lining opening and you're going to give that a little press. Or if you don't want to, you can just hop it right underneath the sewing machine, which is what I'm going to do. And then stitch right across the opening. Then you will take that lining and stuff it to the inside of the bag. Then I'm going to give this a really nice and final press to get everything really nice and crisp. And then the flat pouch is done. And this is the smallest size. It's really nice. And then for the final finishing touch, I'm just going to cut a little piece of this velvet ribbon, 12.5 centimeters, but you can also do less or more. This is kind of what you prefer. And I'm just looping it through the little hardware on my zipper, then closing this up. And then our little flat pouch is finished and it looks very cute. So now we're going to be making our box pouch. So we're going to cut 2 main, 2 lining and 2 batting. And then these notches on the bottom are only for our lining fabric. So here I have my lining with the notches, my batting and my main fabric, 2 of each. And then we're going to take the batting and the main fabric towards the ironing boards. So you will take one of the batting pieces and place it with the glue side facing up. Then you're going to take one of the main pieces and place it right on top so that the wrong side of the fabric is touching the glue side of the batting. And we're going to iron that in place to fuse the batting to the fabric. Then I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to be sewing my quilting lines. You can do diagonal lines as in the pattern, or you can do horizontal lines, vertical lines, whatever you please. I'm going to be doing vertical lines that are 2 centimeters distance from each other. So I'm going to set my stitch length to a long stitch length and then just sew a straight line down starting from my notch in the center without backstitching. Okay, so then after we've quilted both pieces, we're going to take our zipper and we're just going to fold it in half and then find the center. And then we're going to cut little notches on either side, very small, just to find the center of the zipper. Then we're going to place the zipper with the right sides down on the right side of the fabric. And the right sides down just means, you know, so that the zipper pull is facing the fabric or touching the fabric. Then I'm going to find that center notch and pin it in place. Then I'm going to take one of my lining pieces and I'm going to use the side that has one notch at the top. And I'm going to pin that on top with the right side touching the main quilted fabric. Then I'm going to change to a zipper foot. And then I'm going to sew across the entire edge of the zipper. Then I'm going to fold this open and I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side of the zipper. So I'm going to take my other quilted piece with the notch on the top, then fold this the other way and line this up and then put my lining on top with the right side touching. Then sew across this entire edge. And then when we fold our bag open, then the zipper will actually be nicely hidden away with the lining fabric. So this is how it looks from the right side and then this is how it looks from the wrong side, and you can see that the zipper. So we're going to give this a good press and then we're going to top stitch along both sides of the zipper. And I like to keep my zipper foot attached and keep the long stitch length and then just top stitch right alongside the edge. And I'm just doing that on both sides. Then after top stitching, our bag looks like this. We're going to put the main quilted fabric on top of each other, like this, so that the right sides are touching, and then we're doing the same on the lining fabric. And then I'm just going to pin this top seam in place using my sewing clips. And then I'm going to sew across this entire seam with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. And then I'm going to be doing the same for the bottom edge on the lining fabric. And here you want to not sew the entire seam, because remember we have those 2 little notches on the bottom that are going to help us to turn the bag towards the right side. And then we're just going to start sewing the lining. And I'm going to be sewing until my first notch. And then I will start sewing again at my second notch. And then taking my main fabric and sewing the entire seam. Then here we have our bag. Now we're going to press open the seams on the bottom on both the lining and the main fabric. So first I like to trim away the little threads from the opening. And then I'm going to just press this seam open. Then our bag looks something like this. So actually when you put your arm kind of inside that lining and then just let all of the layers fall into place, then you will get this weird shape. Then before continuing and assembling the entire bag, I'm going to be making a little zipper tab. And in the pattern I'm using ribbon for this, but I'm going to make my own for the video. So I'm just cutting a strip of fabric from my leftovers that is 6 centimeters wide. And then the length needs to be at least 10 centimeters. I'm just going to make it a little bit longer, like 15, just to play it safe. Then I'm going to iron this in half so that the right sides are touching. Then I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and sew right across this raw edge with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. And then when I reach the end, I'm just going to sew a few more stitches. Then lift my presser foot up with my needle down and turn. So here I'm actually creating a corner. So then it looks like this. Then I'm going to cut away the seam allowance here and also along the side. Just kind of trimming it in half. And then you just need something to stick up here to turn it towards the other side. So I'm just using a little wooden stick for sushi because that's what I have. But you basically just take these 2 layers at the bottom where the little seam is and we're going to separate them from each other. Then take whatever long object you've chosen that is also very narrow. And then I just push this over to turn it towards the right side. And then I'm going to take this to the ironing board and give it a quick press. And then I'm going to be sewing some of this velvet ribbon on top just because I think that looks fun. And I have it left over. So I'm just putting that up in the center of this little strip. And then I'm just going to sew along both sides of my ribbon. Then I'm trimming this. And then I'm going to cut 2 pieces of 5 centimeters from this piece. And these are going to be my little zipper tabs. Then we're going to take our little bag and with the bag looking like this, we're going to push this aside, the side with the zipper, and we're going to sew our zipper tabs down on the side where there's no zipper on the main fabric. So we're going to take our zipper tab, fold it in half with the wrong sides together. Then I'm going to sew along this side with a 6 millimeter seam allowance. Then I'm going to repeat that on the other side. Then you will take the bag that just looks like this. So again, we're going to line up everything. So we have our main piece, we put our other quilted piece on top, and then also our lining piece like this. And then we're going to sew across this entire edge here with a 1 centimeter seam allowance and also do that on the other side. So I have that pinned in place, and then we're going to be sewing through all of the layers, including the zipper. And then for this step, I am pulling my zipper down. Then I'm going to take my fabric scissors and just trim away my excess zipper fabric. And then doing the same on the other side. So then our bag will look like this. And now we just need to finish up all of these corners. But basically you just take one of these corners like this. And you will pull them apart. So then everything is matching up. Then you will do the same on that main fabric corner. And then you will put them on top of each other. So basically that seam that we just made is in the center. And then we have to sew 4 of these corners with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Then after you've sewn all of those 4 corners, your bag looks like this. So it's very strange, but we do have the little opening here in the lining fabric. And I'm going to take that and pull the entire bag towards the right side. And then your bag should look something like this. So one last thing that we need to do is actually take that lining back towards the outside, and then we're going to stitch the opening closed. You can iron it beforehand, or you can just take this to the sewing machine and edge stitch right along this edge to sew it up. Then you can put the lining back inside the bag, push out all of the corners. Then I'm just going to trim away all of the little threads. And then I like to give this a final press at the ironing board, and then your little box pouch is finished. So that was all for this video. I really hope you enjoyed. If you were just watching this for fun maybe, even though it's over an hour long. And if you are getting this pattern, a really big thank you to everyone that does. Or just if you're watching this and supporting me in that way, I really appreciate it. For now, I wish you all a very happy day, happy knitting and sewing, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye bye!